While one of John McCain's closest friends and Senate colleagues, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham, looked to turn the page from the controversy to just moments ago talking about his friend on the Today Show.
Let's talk about John. It is all over now. The flag is down. When the president mentioned John, he got applause. Terrific. He's reached out to Cindy, the entire family. John has 7 children and a bunch of grandchildren, and says, what can I do to help? And the president told General Kelly whatever they need, they get. So let's look forward. Clearly, they had a tenuous relationship, but he's not the only one to have a tense relationship with John McCain.
It's touching to hear his words, and we'll play more for you. Though Senator McCain is gone, we are still hearing his words. In a letter read by his longtime aide, John McCain encouraged Americans to unite around the ideals that connect us rather than around our divisions.
I want to bring in White House reporter for The Washington Post and CNN analyst Josh Dawsey. Josh, thanks so much. It was your reporting that first revealed that the president initially rejected directly praising Senator McCain. That, of course, led to the flag controversy yesterday. Now that it's all over, do you get the sense from the people you're hearing from in the White House that they're glad they've put this behind them? Do they feel like they have?
Absolutely, but they wanted that done from day one, John. I mean, this was a uniquely Trumpian episode in some ways that 2 days later, he ended up at the place where his aides wished he would have begun in the first place. He came out with a simple statement saying, we respect John McCain, the flag will be at half-staff, we'll help the family, we'll do anything we can, and that is what they originally wanted him to do. But the president at first wouldn't put out a statement, was entirely silent on Sunday and Monday morning, and then yesterday afternoon, under pressure from a number of his advisors, besieged by television coverage, frustrated with so many people going on television and criticizing him, the American Legion, members of Congress. It was an outpour, really cascade of criticism of the way he handled it. And then the president put out a kind statement about John McCain. He again gave kind words last night at a dinner at the White House about John McCain, as you saw earlier. So it's a bit of an episode to be over, but for many in the White House, they wondered, why did this episode need to happen at all?
Well, it didn't. I mean, the president chose for this to happen, and as Lindsey Graham noted, he got applause last night at this dinner for evangelicals at the White House when he praised Senator McCain, and that wasn't a group that John McCain had any super close relationship to, but they were clearly relieved that it was over. You have some reporting on what seemed to bug the president so much on Sunday, the day after John McCain died. What is that?
It's that so many people were going on television and praising John McCain while making either explicit or implicit criticisms of the president. He thought a lot of it was hypocritical. He thought that a lot of people were out to get him. And the more he watched, he told staff, if I would have put out a statement that would have been warm and effusive for John McCain, it would have seemed disingenuous. Everyone knows I don't like the guy. But what the argument that people around him made was, even though you didn't like John McCain, even though you fought with him, or at least were very critical of him at times, and he was critical of the president. He was a war hero. He was 5.5 years in a Vietnam prison, served in the Senate for decades. A simple statement would do. I think the president understood that a lot of Republicans, were not the biggest fans of John McCain. We saw a poll right before he died where his approval rating was in the 40s among Republicans, where the president's among the 80s. But even those who don't, like what John McCain maybe voted against the Affordable Care Act repeal or whatever provision of the day was in Congress, they still thought he deserved a modicum of respect upon his death. And seeing the flag go back to full staff after one day yesterday was jarring to many.
Indeed it was. And the statement he ultimately released didn't read as hypocritical, and the statement he made out loud last night to evangelicals didn't sound like hypocritical. And in fact, Josh, you have some reporting on how the paper statement ultimately was put together?
Well, the president dictated much of a statement, and he began with, while we disagree on policy and politics, before going on to give John McCain respect. And I think you're right. I don't think that was disingenuous. The statement said, we didn't agree with each other, but he deserves respect upon his death. And that's what his aides wanted all along. The first statement that the president nixed was far more kind toward John McCain. It said, he's an American hero. It talked about his service in the Senate, his time as a POW. I mean, it was a pretty lengthy statement, a paragraph or so that contained praise for John McCain. And the president did not want to sign that one because he thought it would not be, an accurate representation of his feelings. But this one yesterday, it seems he was willing to sign.
Josh Dawsey, the episode appears to be over, but as you note from inside the White House, people there feel like it was an episode that never had to happen to begin with. Thanks, Joe, so much, Josh, for your reporting.
Thank you.
Okay, let's bring in Josh Green. He's the national correspondent at Bloomberg Business Week, and Jonathan Martin, national political correspondent for the New York Times. Both are CNN political analysts. Guys, great to have you. It is so touching to listen to Lindsey Graham this morning, and really for months now, Lindsey Graham talk about his dear friend, John McCain. These guys were best friends, and one of the great, I think, really endearing things about them is that they were such public best friends, you know? They talked about how much they loved each other. They talked about how much time they liked to spend together, how funny they found each other. And so Lindsey Graham is, you know, obviously emotional this morning. So here's just another moment of him talking about his dear friend, John McCain.
This man was the conscience of the Senate. He was at times the conscience of the nation. And if I had to pick one person in this great land to explain to someone from a different planet, who are these Americans? It would be John McCain, with an assist from Mark Salter. He had a romantic view of our nation to his last breath, and literally almost the last thing he said to me was, "I love you. I have not been cheated." He was not cheated.
It's so beautiful and so touching, Josh. And so we also got to hear John McCain's words, as I think Lindsey Graham was alluding to. And so, you know, I guess that this whole episode, the controversy about the president struggling to memorialize John McCain. I guess that after these 2.5 days, we can move on.
Well, I think so. I certainly hope so. I think that's probably up to Trump and whether he has any more feelings about McCain that he wants to share, you know, in the hours ahead. But barring that, yes, I do think it's time to move on to a more appropriate way to remember John McCain. We'll see that as his body sits in state, first in the Arizona Capitol, then in Washington. You know, again, though, I think what galls Trump about this episode, you know, he is somebody who experiences life through the medium of cable television, and the praise and the appreciation, the outpouring from just about everybody for John McCain, I think frustrated Trump because that's how he wants to be treated, and of course he isn't. And as Josh Dawsey had mentioned earlier, you know, it's impossible not to compare the two men, how they comport themselves, and I think that's one reason why Trump couldn't resist turning this into a crisis in the way that he has.
I have to say, watching Lindsey Graham there, I have a number of feelings. Number one, we should all have a friend as close as John McCain was to Lindsey Graham, and I'm so happy for both of them that they did have each other. Joe Lieberman was part of that group also. Then there's the political side of it, Jonathan, which is that Lindsey Graham, in a way, is the walking embodiment of the pulling forces within the Republican Party.
Right.
Here is the best, closest, dearest friend to John McCain, who for a long time shared exactly the same values as John McCain. And Lindsey Graham has developed a personal relationship with President Trump, and you can see him being pulled in those two directions.
He does reflect the moment that we're in, and Lindsey Graham is a politician, and he's facing re-election in 2020 and the possibility of a difficult primary. And if President Trump is a friend rather than an enemy, he has a better shot of surviving that primary. And that's the nature of politics. And by the way, I think even some of the biggest McCain defenders would admit privately that McCain himself acted the part of a politician when he had to. John, you and I both recall that he basically dropped the immigration issue in 2008 during the primary when it was clearly a political loser for him in the primary. He kind of moved on. And then when he did have to face a primary of his own in 2010, after coming back to the Senate, he went down to the border and filmed an ad about, you know, build the dang fence. So, look, you know, John McCain is a towering political figure in the history of the country, but he was a political figure, right? He made certain accommodations when he had to, and of course, in this moment of his passing, he's being recalled for his bipartisanship, his public spiritedness, as he should. But it shouldn't obscure the fact that he made accommodations to the politics of the moment when he had to, the same way that his friend certainly is now.
Jonathan Martin, I just want to stick with you for one more second because you have reporting on this about that also very bifurcation that we're seeing in terms of what the Arizona governor now has to do.
Right.
So does the Arizona governor choose a John McCain style replacement for John McCain, or a Donald Trump acolyte for the replacement for John McCain's seat?
I think it's none of the above, Allison. I think it's C. I think the governor, Doug Ducey of Arizona, who's really neither a Trumpian Republican or a McCainiac. He's something that's sort of neither fish nor fowl. He's really more of a kind of Chamber of Commerce, pro-business, kind of Koch-friendly, frankly, Republican. I think what Governor Ducey is going to do is try to square this circle by finding somebody who's inoffensive, somebody who is not going to anger the McCain family and the McCain loyalists, but somebody who also is not going to offend President Trump and his acolytes in Arizona. Look, I think there are a handful of conventional conservatives who could do that, but to the McCain folks, that's a bit of a letdown, right? Because they want to see somebody fill the shoes that reflected the kind of bigness of McCain. And by a very Goldwater, guys, don't forget that McCain took the Goldwater seat. So there is a sort of, golden lineage in this seat that Ducey is now going to fill.
I will note, you only gave him an A and B option. You did not give him option C, which was the Jonathan Jones.
I took it, John.
He went far beyond the rules. I do want to play if I can, because I do also think this was a remarkable moment yesterday. And one of the really pinnacles of these last few days is when Rick Davis, longtime aide to Senator McCain, read the letter that McCain wanted to be read after his passing, almost as if anticipating the discussion and the debate that might ensue at the time. So let's listen to Rick Davis.
We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down, when we doubt the power of our ideals rather than trust them to be the great force for change they have always been.
Josh, that seems very different than President Trump's inauguration speech written by Steve Bannon, and Stephen Miller there. And you've written books about this. There is a political divide, and he talks about tribalism, political tribalism. Often people look at that and say Democrats versus Republicans. No, this is all within the Republican Party, this divide.
Right. Yeah, I think the tribalism he's referring to, there's pretty clearly tribalism on behalf of Trump and against, moderate Republicans, Democrats, and everybody else. The distinction that stands out to me is that John McCain in that statement has what I would call a classically romantic view of America and of American exceptionalism that stands in stark contrast to all the noise about American carnage and so on that we've heard from Trump and from Steve Bannon pretty consistently